or use annual ryegrass or whatever. All of you here probably have raised wheat here in Wisconsin. So, and I'm guessing that all of you at one time or another who have raised wheat have had a wheat crop failure because it winter killed. So the way I look at it is, if you want the crop to overwinter, let's just pick the seed that winter can't kill. And winter cereal rye is just a very, very difficult species to have any amount of winter kill. So I simply pick it because it matched your goal the best. And that's the reason for going with cereal rye. Winter wheat, if you don't mind the risking the chance of some serious winter kill from weather like we're having right now, use winter wheat. You might have it in your bin. There's nothing wrong with winter wheat. It's simply a function of I just try to pick the thing that I think is most likely to work. In the case of spring barley, I get asked when we want we want nature to kill it so that we don't have to deal with it in the spring. Spring barley is the species I go to, and a lot of people say, why not oats? Oats is a great fall cover crop. There's nothing wrong with oats at all. I picked spring barley for several reasons. I learned this from a Green Lake County farmer who is still using, but has used spring barley as a cover crop for literally decades, and had tried every species known to man to get to spring barley. Spring barley germinates and grows faster than oats. That's proven research. It germinates and grows faster than oats. We're running out of growing season, right? That's why we hired the airplane to do the cover crop season. So why not pick the fastest growing one of your options? So that's the first thing. Secondly, if we have falls like we've had these last several falls, where it's really warm late, the oats and spring barley, it would be likely that they can grow right through the vegetative state and into the reproductive growth stages. And so when these plants get into the reproductive growth stage, their carbon to nitrogen ratio changes. There's more carbon to the amount of nitrogen that's in that plant. So what that means is you've got kind of a woody residue. And then anybody who's raised oats as a cover crop knows that if that goes into and starts making straw, that residue that you deal with the following spring can be really challenging to work through, even with no-till equipment. So it just becomes kind of a woody, fibrous mess, and it has to do with that carbon-nitrogen ratio. Spring barley, when it goes into the reproductive growth stage and starts growing straw, has a much lower carbon-nitrogen ratio compared to the oats. So it breaks down, the residue breaks down much, much better than oats, and it's a lot more manageable residue for the grower to work with when you're planting your subsequent crop. A lot of people say, well, geez, I really want to use oats because they're so much cheaper. And the next slide, I think it's on the next one. Good. It might be a little difficult to see, but if you actually study the bushel weight and the seeds per pound, barley is a 48-pound bushel. On average, it's 13,600 seeds per pound. So if you figure out how many seeds you get in a bushel compared to oats, which is less pounds in a bushel, fewer seeds per pound, and then you do the math on the cost right down to a per 1,000 seed cost, they're identical. You can do the same thing with a bushel of barley that you did with 2 bushel of oats. And I'm using the retail price of certified cleaned oats versus certified cleaned barley. When you run that math, they cost the same. So I guess the point is that there isn't really an actual cost penalty for using spring barley over oats. And you get these other advantages. So as promised here, we said that we were going to talk about the importance of seed to soil contact. And the reason why I mention this is if you're thinking about having somebody broadcast cover crop seeds on your field, you have to look at you need to scout your field to determine if you have a seed surface that's going to be conducive to it actually growing. And I use this slide as an example. This field here was seeded from further than you can see over there till further you can see over there with the exact same mix. This was a mix of annual ryegrass, crimson clover, and radish, okay? It was flown into soybeans. And the color may not show it real well, but you notice how this is a really, really good stand right there? And if you look to the left or to the right of this area, you'll notice that it's not a good stand. It's a terrible stand, okay? What happened was the rotation over here was, this was soybeans, the year before was corn. We went out there and seeded that mix of annual ryegrass, crimson clover, and radish. And those seeds we could find laying on top of last year's corn residue. They never touched the soil. This area right here was a fence line. There was no corn there. So they cleared this fence line out and they did some tillage. Basically, they're a no-till farmer, but they did some tillage to level that fence line off. And then planted soybeans in there, and there wasn't a seed in that area that didn't grow. And that's because that seed actually touched the soil. Now there's a little caveat to this that I've learned. This was when we were using annual ryegrass, and I've become less, I don't care for annual ryegrass much. Annual ryegrass is a super light seed. And those of you who don't know what annual ryegrass is, just to describe it, it's like lawn seed, like what you seed your lawn with, right? There's no density to it, and it'll simply lay on top of a corn residue, and never, the wind and the rain isn't going to get it down to the soil. The other thing is the size of the seed is a good representative of how much sugars are in that seed, how much energy that is in a reserve to get that plant started. And if you compare that to a cereal rye seed, there's not much there. So it may germinate on top of that leaf of corn residue and begin to grow. But if that root, that sprout, can't find its way to soil, it's not going to have anything to live off of. And it's going to die very quickly after germination. You take the same cereal rye seed and you get that to germinate, there's enough plant sugar, or carbohydrates within that seed to get a taproot onto the soil to start feeding that leaf. So it's the seed to soil contact thing is important, but it's particularly important when you're dealing with a really lightweight seed. You get into these heavier seeds and I've had less issues with it. But it's important to just make sure, is your residue been consumed, or is this just a mat? And if it's a mat, you want to be really thinking if this is the right thing to do, broadcasting the seed. So now we're going to move on to the timing of interseeding. And I mentioned that I'm really going to beat to death this whole sunlight thing, because I found this sunlight issue to be the most important reason for success. It is as important as moisture. Obviously, if there's no moisture, it's not going to germinate. If there's no sunlight, after it's germinated, it's just a matter of time before it dies. We've got some guidelines, and I kind of make this a little more complicated than what it needs to be. A lot of the audiences that I speak to raise vegetables, so I lump silage corn in with vegetable crops, and I call it a green crop, meaning if you harvest the crop when it's green, you do not want to plant or interseed the cover crop more than 2 weeks from harvest. And the reason why you don't want to have it out there in the shade for so long is the same reason why weeds die in a canopy crop, right? If you have a weed seed germinate and begin to grow, that weed seed will germinate, start to grow, and eventually be starved of sunlight and die. That's why your fields stay clean once they're canopy. Well, if we're planting into green beans, sweet corn, silage corn, lima beans, whatever we're interseeding into that's going to be harvested in a vegetative, in a green state, we just don't want to put the seeds out there more than 2 weeks ahead of time. If we're going to seed into grain corn, we want the plant to be senesced up to the ear. We want all the leaves from the ear down to be dead. And that's the time when we go put the seeds out. What that does is we put those seeds out at that growth stage. The next rainfall that comes along will germinate that seed and it'll begin to grow. Meanwhile, you have more leaves beginning to senesce, and you're getting more sunlight penetration into that corn canopy, so that there can be sunlight getting to those cover crop plants. Soybeans, we want the soybean field turning yellow. That means that the leaves are about to drop, but they haven't dropped. When they drop, there's going to be sunlight penetration into the canopy, which is going to allow the cover crop to live. We put in a couple pictures just to kind of help, get an idea. I don't know where on earth this photo was taken. I've never seen a soybean field actually turn yellow quite this uniformly, right? So we got to understand that not the entire soybean field is going to turn at the same time. I tend to suggest that growers err on the side of late than early. If you get out there on part of the field where all the leaves have fallen off the plant, and we're using cereal rye, and the rest of the field is turned, but the leaves haven't fallen, where all the leaves fell, you'd be concerned, the obvious concern would be seed to soil contact. If we're using cereal rye, there's enough energy in that germinated rye seed for it to get a root to the soil, if it hasn't already found its way to the soil through the residue from those soybean leaves. So rather than go out when it's green before a leaf hit the ground, do it later. And I've had times when I've been out seeding and thought to myself, man, there's this area of the field here where all the leaves are on the ground and I can just see the vines sticking up. And boy, that's going to be a problem because, maybe that didn't have as good a seed to soil contact as we'd want to see. Only to drive and walk out to the field where that was that way, and it's a beautiful stand. You can get this established with the leaves on the ground. It's not reason for panic. If we were using annual ryegrass, I don't think you'd have the same result. I think in the case of annual ryegrass, you're going to have a problem because it's not going to get to the soil surface, and there's not enough energy in that seed to get the sprout to the soil. Kind of revisiting timing in corn. This would be ideally what we want that corn plant to look like when we start putting the seeds in. All the leaves below the ear have senesced, and it won't be long, and these are going to do the same thing, and we're going to have good sunlight penetration down to the soil surface. And this would be timing in grain corn, right? Silage corn, we're going out 2 weeks prior.